Our Old Testament reading this morning comes to us from 1 Kings, the second chapter, verses 1 through 12. We are in our final Sunday of our summer sermon series on the life of David. These verses in 1 Kings deal with the end of David's life. You're invited to follow along on page 265 in your pew Bibles in the Old Testament. Let's all listen for God's word to us today. When David's time to die drew near, he charged his son Solomon, saying, I am about to go the way of all the earth. Be strong, be courageous, and keep the charge of the Lord your God, walking in his ways and keeping his statutes, his commandments, his ordinances, and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses, so that you may prosper in all that you do and wherever you turn. Then the Lord will establish his word that he spoke concerning me. If your heirs take heed to their way, to walk before me in faithfulness with all their heart and with all their soul, there shall not fail you a successor on the throne of Israel. Moreover, you know also what Joab, son of Zeruiah, did to me, how he dealt with the two commanders of the armies of Israel, Abner, son of Ner, and Amasa, son of Jether, whom he murdered, retaliating in time of peace for blood that had been shed in war, and putting the blood of war on the belt around his waist and on the sandals on his feet. Act therefore according to your wisdom, but do not let his gray head go down to Sheol in peace. Deal loyally, however, with the sons of Barzillai the Gileadite, and let them be among those who eat at your table. For with such loyalty they met me when I fled from your brother Absalom. There is also with you Shimei, son of Gera, the Benjaminite from Bahurim, who cursed me with a terrible curse on the day when I went to Mahanaim. But when he came down to meet me at the Jordan, I swore to him by the Lord, I will not put you to death with the sword. Therefore, do not hold him guiltless, for you are a wise man. You will know what you ought to do to him, and you must bring his gray head down with blood to Sheol. Then David slept with his ancestors and was buried in the city of David. The time that David reigned over Israel was 40 years. He reigned 7 years in Hebron and 33 years in Jerusalem. So Solomon sat on the throne of his father David, and his kingdom was firmly established. The word of the Lord. A few years ago, David Brooks, columnist for the New York Times, wrote a piece about a young woman named Clementine. Clementine is a survivor of the genocide in Rwanda from 25 years ago. She was 6 years old when she fled her homeland with her older sister, leaving her parents and spending her childhood in refugee camps across 8 different African nations. She came to the United States as a refugee in 2000 with her sister. A few years later, Clementine was one of 50 winners of Oprah Winfrey's high school essay contest. In 2006, Oprah had a show celebrating all the winners. She asked Clementine and her sister when they had last seen their parents. Well, 12 years ago, they said. Then Oprah says to them, your family is here. And to Clementine's astonishment, her parents walk out on stage with 2 other siblings. Clementine immediately runs into their arms, overwhelmed with elation. Brooks writes, Clementine's story, as I knew it then, had a comforting arc to it. Separation, perseverance, reunion, and joy. It's the kind of clean, inspiring story that many of us tell in less dramatic form, about our own lives. But that arc was not the whole story. As Brooks explains, Clementine never really reconciled with her family. They flew back to Africa the following Monday after that Oprah show. And Clementine's sister married a refugee worker, but things did not turn out all roses there either. Clementine herself had moments of struggle along the way as she tried to reconcile her old life with her new one. Brooks goes on, "We work hard, you and I, to cram our lives into legible narratives, but we live in the fog of reality." He says that he admires Clementine for many things, including the maturity to accept unanswerable ambiguity, the unwillingness to settle for the simple fake story, and the capacity to look at life in all of its ugly complexity. The capacity to look at life in all its ugly complexity. I think the writer of the David narrative in the Bible had that same ability. After all, King David's life does not take the shape of a beautiful arc, and it sure doesn't end with a clean, inspirational story. As one commentator puts it, David died in the middle of a family squabble. Instead of his children and wives gathered around him expressing love and gratitude, David was embroiled in a mare's nest of intrigue and deceit. And that's just the first chapter of 1 Kings. In our 12 verses for today, David behaves like the Godfather, a vengeful mafia boss. He says to his son Solomon, "You know what Joab did to me, how he dealt with the two commanders of the armies of Israel whom he murdered. Act therefore according to your wisdom, but do not let his gray head go down to Sheol in peace." And then David says, "There is also with you Shimei, son of Gera, who cursed me with a terrible curse. You must bring his gray head down with blood to Sheol." What do you make of this? What are we supposed to make of this? A bloodthirsty David? A vengeful David? You heard what the writer of the epistle to the Hebrews said. David was one of the pillars of Israel's faith. This is the same David who is referred to in the New Testament whenever Jesus is called Son of David. I don't think they were thinking about the very end of David's life. But as unpleasant as it is, there is something reassuring about all this to me. Not that I like what David decided to do, but I do like that the writer of the story refused to gloss over David's difficulties at the end of his life. Because even if you and I do not go around behaving like a mafia boss, we don't go around behaving like a mafia boss, right? No. There is something in David that I recognize. A difficulty David had that I know I have as well. You know what it is? Letting go. Letting go. David, at the end of his life, had trouble letting go. Letting go of his grudges, letting go of control, letting go of who he used to be. Have you ever had trouble letting go of anything in your life? I recall when I was 12 years old and I went water skiing for the first time. Out on a lake with my cousins, my uncle was driving the boat, another uncle giving directions, instructions to all of us cousins who were on the boat. they told me how to get up in the water, crouching position, let the boat pull you up. But if you fall, they said, just stick your hand up so that we can see it and release the rope. Well, easy enough. Of course, the first time trying, I didn't get up at all. I didn't make it anywhere, fell right away. Next time, I started to get up. It looks like I'm going to be up. Boat is pulling me, and then I lost my balance and I fell face first again into the water, but I was remembering my uncle's instructions. If you fall, stick your hand above the water. So I stuck my hand above the water, but the boat is still going, and I'm face down in the water with my hand in the air, waving my hand in the air, being pulled by the boat. Water is going up my nose and down my throat, and why aren't they slowing down? And finally, after I felt like I had swallowed half of the lake, I got my head up, spitting and sputtering, and the boat stopped. My uncle's standing there at the side of the boat with a big grin on his face, and he says, "Ben, you forgot to let go of the rope." That would have done the trick, wouldn't it? All I had to do was let go. I forgot to let go. In my 12-year-old brain, my instinct was to hang on. And 35 years later, my instinct is still, in many respects, to hang on. Hanging on to the illusion that one's body can do the things it used to do 20 years ago. Just to take a purely hypothetical example. Hanging on to the fantasy that if I work hard and play by God's rules, God will take care of me and my loved ones like it is some kind of deal. Hanging on to the belief that faith doesn't really need to cost me that much. Hanging on to the idols that give me comfort every day. You know those idols, right? That my time is my own, that I'm in control of my life, that being successful is always the same thing as being faithful. Is there anything in your life that you're hanging on to right now? It doesn't have to be something bad. It can be something good. John Claypool was a pastor of another generation. And when he was a boy growing up, World War II broke out. Claypool writes, "When World War II started, my family did not have a washing machine. With gas rationed and the laundry several miles away, keeping our clothes clean became an intensely practical problem. One of my father's, he said, one of my father's younger business associates was drafted and his wife prepared to go with him, and we offered them to let them store their furniture in our basement. Quite unexpectedly, he says, they suggested that we use their washing machine while they were gone. Well, he writes, since I used to help with the washing across the years, I developed quite an affectionate relationship for that old green Bendix washing machine. But eventually the war ended and our friends returned, and in the meantime I had forgotten, he says. I had forgotten how that washing machine came into our possession in the first place. When they came and took it back, I was terribly upset, said so quite openly. But my mother, he writes, my mother, being the wise woman she is, sat me down and put things in perspective. She said, wait a minute, son. You must remember that machine never belonged to us in the first place. That we ever got to use it at all was a gift. So instead of being mad at its being taken away, let's use this occasion to be grateful that we ever had this gift at all. Good advice. Good advice about so many of the gifts in our own lives, but difficult advice, right? Sometimes it's hard to let go of the gifts that God has given us. I recall the woman who came to my office years ago. She had an empty nest in her house for the first time in 25 years. Last of her 4 children, finally off to college, she and her husband had the house all to themselves. And she was beside herself. She missed the noise of her kids. She missed staying up late with her kids. She missed her kids' friends who always came over with their kids. She knew that this time in her life would come. She wasn't ready for that time in her life to come. She really liked the life she used to have. How do we do it? How do you do it? How do we let go? This is the question that the end of David's life raises for us. How do we let go? Not just of the ugly stuff, but also of the good stuff. I hope after a year here of being with all of you, you realize I don't go for formulas very much. I'm not a big faith formula kind of person. I do believe in trust. And if there's anything that the big picture story of David says to me, it's this: trust the imagination of God. Trust the imagination of God. Remember at the beginning of David's story, Samuel is looking for a king. So he goes to Jesse's family. Jesse trots out the eldest son, right? Is that going to be the king? Samuel says no. So Jesse trots out the next one. Is that the king? No. And the next one, and the next one, and the next one, until finally Samuel says to Jesse, you got any more? And Jesse says, oh yeah, there's one off tending the sheep. He's the youngest one though. Samuel says, bring him. He's the one. The runt of the litter? Yeah, the runt of the litter. Whose imagination captured that one? Was it Jesse's? No. It was God. It was God. How many of you here today know the story of David and Goliath? Oh, come on. Yeah, the kids here know the story of David and Goliath. And Goliath was out there, and the Israelites were what? They were afraid, weren't they? They were scared out of their minds. And David goes out there with a sling and some stones, and Goliath laughs at David. Goliath cannot picture why this little guy is going out there. I'll bet there were some Israelites laughing at David as well. And what happened? What happened? You know what happened. Goliath was defeated by David. Whose imagination had that one? Was it Goliath? Was it the Israelites? No, it was God. The fact is, our imaginations pale in comparison to the imagination of the living and loving Lord. Do you remember when Jesus was born, what kind of Messiah the people said they were waiting for? A Messiah like David. A return to the good old days of King David. Was that the Messiah whom God sent? No. God looked at the world and said, you don't need another David, you need Jesus. And just like Jesus came long ago, Jesus comes to us today. And Jesus asks each of us to follow him today. And Jesus says to everyone in this room, trust the imagination of God today. And we say to Jesus, yeah, that's fine, but just tell us where we're going. And Jesus says, trust. Trust the imagination of God. The pastor, Michael Linval, tells the story of an older couple he used to know. This was when he was a teenager, when he was living in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. The older couple were friends of Michael's parents. Their names were John and May. John was manager of a huge national wildlife refuge there, but Before moving to northern Michigan, John was the manager of an even larger wildlife refuge in western Alaska on the Bering Sea. The place was remote, so remote, in fact, that when John and May lived there in the 1950s, the supply ship, the one that would bring food, it came one time a year. It was impossible to grow anything that far north, so except for some local game and fish, everything that one needed to eat during the course of a year came on that one boat. Meat, canned goods, flour, sugar, vegetables, and eggs, one boat, once a year. Planes would fly in with food, but it was very expensive to get your food by plane. So if you could not afford the planes, you ordered a year's supply of food from the boat, froze what you could, and then you hoped that the rest would keep. This is what John and May did. Now, John and May liked eggs, and they ordered a whole year's supply of eggs. You can't really freeze eggs, but they kept if they were refrigerated well. Do you know what happens to eggs that get refrigerated over the course of the year? According to John and May, they would not go rotten, they would simply change. They would change slowly, very slowly. Each morning, John and May would enjoy their eggs, and they never noticed the change in the eggs because it happened so gradually. After 12 months, they would find themselves very contentedly eating year-old eggs when the fresh ones would arrive from the boat. Can you imagine the introduction of fresh eggs to your breakfast plate after eating year-old eggs? When John and May would take those new eggs and scramble them up for breakfast, they did not taste wonderful, they tasted awful. May said they would spend the first few days eating their new eggs and spitting them back out, and then they'd start searching for any of the old ones in the fridge. They were so accustomed to the taste of stale eggs eaten one day at a time, they liked them better than the fresh ones. Has this ever happened to you? I'm not talking about eggs. Have you ever gotten so used to the way things are that you do not notice things are changing until that change is upon you? And then you're scrambling around trying to see if you've buried any old eggs in the fridge because the change is just so new. I hope the next time you're looking for those old eggs, you will stop yourself and remember that letting go is not just a part of life we got to slog through. Letting go works hand in hand with the imagination of God. What is God imagining for you at this time in your life? As far as I can tell, there's only one way to find out. Amen.